I am mindful that a lot of families right now are going to be having young people going off to school. Either they're going off to college here this coming week, or in just a few short weeks, the kids who are in elementary, junior high, and high school will be returning to school. And I'm mindful in part because this time of year always makes me think that 18 years ago, this particular week, I wound up standing in front of the main gates of Mundelein Seminary in Chicago. Like many institutions of higher learning, Mundelein has a beautiful main entry gate, two big, beautiful brick pillars on either side, and a wonderful wrought iron gate over the top that says University of St. Mary of the Lake, which is the full name for the university. That beautiful gate sits right there on Maple Avenue in Mundelein, Illinois. And in its own way, as I stood there, or more precisely was in my car getting ready to drive through the gate, couldn't help but feel that it was a great welcome. Passing through that gate would begin 5 years of preparation for ministry in the church. 5 years of formation that would head me down a particular path. But I also, as I look back, can't help but feel that for all of us who enter through those kinds of gates, for all of us, they are also the narrow kind of gate that Jesus speaks of in the gospel this morning. For to enter through those gates means to leave behind an old way of life. Most of us left behind our professions, how it was that we earned our daily bread before we entered seminary, to take on this new, more prayerful life. And it's true for any of us who enter through those kinds of gates, be it for professional schools, for college, for school, or the other ways that we can think about gates in our lives. It's really what Jesus is speaking about in the gospel this morning when he calls us to enter through the narrow gate or the narrow door. As he speaks to us this morning in the gospel, though, it's important for us to remember that this section of Luke's gospel actually began for us back on the last Sunday of June, when, as Luke records in the gospel, Jesus set his face like flint, pointed toward Jerusalem for his journey there and to the cross. When Luke uses those words, Jesus set his face like flint, what he means is Jesus set out in determination to make this journey that he had to make. And along that journey, he has gathered his disciples, and we go in their company. And it's important for us to remember how Jesus has spoken to us about what it means to enter through the narrow gate. So think of the Gospels that we've heard since Jesus set his face like flint. We have heard how important it is to look beyond the divisions that we sometimes place in our lives about who we can or can't associate with, who we should or should not care for, as Jesus taught the beautiful parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus also teaching us that compassion should always be our first response, not wondering if we should do anything at all. Jesus would go on to teach the disciples, and we who are in his company, he would go on to teach us about the beauty of sometimes simply sitting in his presence, to listen, to be prayerful, as he spoke and reminded Martha about her sister Mary, who was more intent on spending that time in the presence of the Lord than being about all of the details of hospitality. Then, of course, Jesus would go on to teach a very simple but powerful prayer, the Lord's Prayer, that teaches us how to sort of reorient a number of our priorities and what it is we are to pray for and to ask God for. The journey continued, as Jesus then shared with us that curious parable about the man who had so much stuff, he decided he would build bigger barns to put it in. He was so proud of himself, and Jesus said, don't worry about the bigger barns. Worry about the things and how they might be put to use to help build up the kingdom. That was followed very quickly then by Jesus' encouragement for us to be the servants who are always ready, willing, and able to serve. No matter if it's morning, noon, or night, to always be willing to serve the Master, the Lord Jesus himself, using those gifts that we have been given so that we might be known as good and faithful stewards. All of those are about entering through the narrow gate. As I describe them, they sound somewhat innocuous, but think about it in this way. When was the last time, and I'm going to challenge you, pay attention for 24 hours today. So from this afternoon until tomorrow afternoon, pay attention to whatever news it is that you read, whatever magazines you may pay attention to, the newspaper. Where have you seen or heard on TV, on the radio, or in the newspaper, be compassionate? Look beyond the divisions that exist sometimes in our minds about the human race. That is not a message that the culture projects to us. And yet it is very clearly a message that Jesus has spoken to us. And because that message is so counter to what we hear in the world we live in, to live Jesus' message and its proclamation truly and honestly in our lives means to enter through the narrow gate. As you read and pay attention to the news sources that you hear over the next 24 hours, I don't think there's going to be a single voice that will say, you know what? It's okay to give away all your stuff. Don't be concerned about things. I'm willing to bet that what we will hear is, you deserve it. You've earned it. Pamper yourself. Splurge just a little bit. And you know what? If you have so much stuff that you can't keep it in your house any longer, we've got these little storage buildings over here that you can rent from us, and we'll help you store it for you. I am willing to bet, though, that we will not hear anything about spend time in prayer today. Take time to simply rest in the presence of the Lord. I'm willing to bet if I turn on any of the major news channels today, that will not be the message that we hear. And yet Jesus clearly says, take time to pray. That's an integral part of who we're called to be. And when we respond to Jesus' encouragement to take that time to pray over and against what the culture may say, we're entering through the narrow gate. I'm willing to bet that if I turn on any of the major news channels, there will not be one single encouragement. Go out today and be a good servant. Go out today and work morning, noon, and night to be a good servant. Use your gifts. I am willing to bet that I will not hear that. And yet Jesus encourages us to do exactly that in living out our life of discipleship. And in choosing to respond to the words of Jesus and his encouragement over and against the messages that we hear, we're walking through the narrow gate, making that choice. The first reading makes it very clear that there will be others who will make that choice with us, who will walk through that narrow gate. The interesting thing is that included amongst that crowd are people that we would not put there. Folks from Put and Lud, from Javan, people who are enemies to the people of Israel. We might not include in that crowd of people we think are going to see God face to face someday. We may not include the people that we don't like or that we intensely dislike. And yet God says somehow, mysteriously, they will be included. And perhaps we have some small part to play in helping them to be included or in allowing them to help us to be included. And again, we walk through the narrow door. That narrow path, as Jesus makes clear, will lead him to Jerusalem and to the cross. That path leads us right here to this altar, but we also know that the path does not end here. We know that the path doesn't end at the cross. We know that entering through that narrow door, Jesus has won for us a life beyond this one, and that we need to do all we can to follow that path that he sets for us. Difficult, that's true, because there are times when others will not understand what it is we are doing or why we do it. Difficult, that's true, because there are some times when we ourselves will not be inclined to want to follow that path. And yet we can be good examples with and for one another of how we can do that day after day.